The missing child case was closed in under 48 hours. Not because answers were found, but because nothing obvious was. The house was small, quiet, and orderly. No broken locks. No signs of struggle. The child's bedroom was intact, toys neatly arranged, bed untouched. The front door showed no forced entry. The back door was locked from the inside. Initial conclusion: voluntary disappearance or non-criminal event. But procedure demanded evidence collection anyway. The child's backpack was taken. Bed sheets were bagged. Door handles swabbed. The carpet near the bedroom door was cut and preserved. Everything was tagged, logged, and shelved. At the time, none of it meant anything. Search teams covered nearby fields. Canvassing turned up nothing. No witnesses. No surveillance. The case cooled almost immediately. What went unnoticed wasn't the absence of evidence. It was the presence of evidence without interpretation. Years later, the case was reopened during a cold case review. Not because of a tip. Not because of a confession. Because someone asked a simple question. Why had the carpet sample been cut that way? The preserved section showed directional fiber compression, subtle, but present. Fibers bent toward the hallway, not away from it. That suggested weight being dragged, not walked. But that observation hadn't been made originally. The sample had been collected too early, before anyone knew what to look for. The backpack was examined next. No DNA hits at the time. No fingerprints. Just a standard school bag. Under modern analysis, trace particulates were detected inside the lining. Soil. Fine grit. Not from the yard. From a construction site. The house was nowhere near one. The bed sheets told another quiet story. No signs of sleep disturbance. But faint transfer marks near the foot of the bed suggested someone standing there leaning down. Not the child. An adult. The timeline was rebuilt from scratch. The last confirmed sighting of the child was early evening. Phone records showed the caregiver made several short calls. Afterward, none answered. The calls stopped abruptly at 7:42 p.m. That was logged as stress. It wasn't. It was the moment the situation changed. The door handle swabs ignored for years showed partial touch DNA. Degraded. Inconclusive before. Now enough for comparison. It didn't match family. It matched someone who had never been questioned. The caregiver's story had been simple. Too simple. The child went to bed. The house was quiet. The door was still locked in the morning. But the door hadn't been opened from outside. It had been opened and closed before anyone noticed. The evidence had been there all along. It just arrived before the right questions did. The house had waited patiently for answers. Years had passed since the initial disappearance, yet every item collected that first day remained untouched in storage. Tagged. Logged. Preserved. Silent witnesses waiting for someone to interpret them. The carpet sample was brought out again. The fibers, compressed toward the hallway, now told a story clearer than ever. The directionality suggested movement, dragging, deliberate, controlled. It wasn't consistent with a child wandering off alone. It wasn't accidental. It was a hand-guided extraction. The bed sheets were next. The faint transfer marks near the foot of the bed, barely noticeable before, revealed the subtle pressure of an adult leaning over the sleeping area. The marks corresponded with the footprint patterns from the carpet, suggesting the same person had moved between the 2 points. The backpack, long overlooked, contained the final clue. Modern analysis identified microresidues, soil, dust, and fibers consistent with a construction site outside the neighborhood. The child could not have carried them on their own, nor could any known family member explain their presence. The combination of the carpet, sheets, and backpack data pointed to one conclusion: someone from outside the immediate family had been in the home that evening. The timeline had always been assumed simple. The child last seen at 7:30 p.m., lights out by 8 p.m., morning arrival at 7:15 a.m. Everything else had been filler. But now, correlating the evidence with environmental and physical cues, investigators identified a critical window, 7:40 p.m. to 7:55 p.m., 15 minutes, during which the caregiver's calls had stopped abruptly. That pause, once dismissed as normal, now marked the exact period when the child was taken. No alarms had been triggered. No doors forced. The perpetrator had known precisely how to avoid detection. Even small details reinforced the narrative. The faint chemical odor detected on the rug, barely noticeable at the time, now confirmed the presence of a cleaning agent used to reduce fingerprints and obscure trace evidence. The slightly misaligned cushions on the sofa, ignored during the first investigation, aligned perfectly with the directionality of movement inferred from the carpet fibers. Every minor irregularity, once discounted, was now a puzzle piece. Cross-referencing DNA traces with national databases revealed a partial match, a contractor who had recently worked in homes nearby. The profile didn't match the family, but the environmental fibers from the backpack confirmed proximity. The presence of construction site soil in the backpack indicated the child had been moved, briefly or partially, to a location connected to this individual. The bedroom's small details, door handles, light switches, and appliance usage supported this reconstruction. Touch DNA from the door handle at 7:50 p.m. suggested someone had exited after the act. The house's internal sensors recorded subtle door movement. Nothing that would trigger alarms, nothing that would alert neighbors, but sufficient to align perfectly with the adjusted timeline. Each piece of evidence corroborated the others. The carpet told of movement. The bedsheets of pressure. The backpack of external interaction. The DNA traces of an outside hand. The home systems of precise timing. Alone, each item had seemed minor. Collected too early, considered insignificant, it had been shelved. Together, they created a cohesive, undeniable narrative. Reconstructing the sequence, the perpetrator entered the home through an unlocked door. They approached the child's room carefully, avoiding known sensor zones. The child, asleep, offered no resistance. The individual lifted or guided the child carefully, minimizing disturbance. Pressure marks on the bed and rug matched this. The child was removed briefly into a holding area. The presence of construction site fibers indicated temporary relocation or handling outside the home. The perpetrator ensured the house appeared untouched upon exit. The child was ultimately recovered safely, though shaken. The evidence led investigators not only to the method, but also to the specific individual. The arrest was straightforward. No courtroom theatrics, no confessions broadcasted. The truth was in the evidence, and the evidence alone carried the day. This case exemplified one critical lesson: collecting evidence too early is not failure, it is patience. The physical items existed, preserved correctly. They only required the right tools, the right questions, and time to reveal their story. The carpet, bed sheets, backpack, and DNA traces, the very objects dismissed in the first investigation, became the case's narrators. The home had spoken all along. Investigators had simply needed to listen. The child's disappearance had once seemed inexplicable. What was once considered accidental or benign became a calculated act, defined entirely by the evidence. The initial investigators had done what was required. They collected. The evidence had waited. It had waited for someone to see the pattern, to reconstruct the window of time, to align the movement and trace fibers, to measure what had been moved and what had been touched. The outcome was clear. The crime had been planned, precise, and deliberately concealed. The meticulous collection of evidence, even if overlooked for years, allowed justice to be achieved without relying on confessions, eyewitness error, or unreliable testimony. It had always been a case of science and method, not drama. And in the silence of the evidence, the truth had finally spoken. If you're drawn to stories where silence hides the truth, subscribe to Silent Evidence Files. This channel documents fictional crime cases where evidence tells the story people tried to erase. New full-length crime audiobooks are released regularly. Listen closely. The quiet details always speak last.